And it's time to empty our wallets yet again. Welcome everybody to the Steam Spring Sale for 2024, running now through March 21st. Here are my strategy game recommendations, starting with Battle Brothers at 50% off, bringing it to around $14 US. Battle Brothers is a medieval fantasy open world strategy game. It's really something quite unique, as you can tell by the very look and feel of it, but there's a lot to this game. It is deep, it is dark, and slightly unforgiving, with permadeath reeking its way through and across your entire band of characters. Combat itself, if you're not moving through the world trying to generate money, resources, and crucial gold to keep yourself alive, is turn-based tactical fights. And here each character really comes into their own. Plenty of opportunity inside of Battle Brothers to develop a deep, rich story. It kind of reminds me of Crusader Kings a little bit, with a bit of RimWorld thrown in for good measure. Next, Dune Spice Wars, 35% off, bringing this fantastic game down to around $20 US. I know, 35%, not necessarily the greatest discount, but I also want to focus on really good games in this video, and Dune Spice Wars is exactly one of those. This is a real-time strategy game, obviously set on Arrakis. It's just received another update, and by the way, another brilliant update. One of my long-held opinions of Dune Spice Wars is that this game was fantastic, right from the moment it launched in early access on Steam, what must be around, I don't know, a year and a half ago at this point. I've covered it quite a bit on the channel, so there's plenty of stuff here to talk about, but in a nutshell, Dune Spice Wars is a really solid 4X game. Political intrigue, technology, resources, of course, the most important one of all being spice. Control the spice, control the council, and win the game. Dune Spice Wars is a fantastic real-time strategy game. I couldn't recommend it more. My next recommendation, fairly quick, I'll keep this one, is Crusader Kings 3. At 60% off, I believe this is the best discount we've ever seen. First equal, or perhaps first time. At about $20 US, the base game, this grand strategy medieval simulation game, of course, is a great deal. There's plenty of DLC. The game is still being updated, most recently stretching into the next chapter of its DLC, with this core DLC having just launched, introducing loads of wonderful things, most notably to me, these plagues. There's loads to discover, and of course, so much rich storytelling, RPG, almost roleplay-like options are available to you here. Crusader Kings 3 is a wonderful simulation game. You need to be prepared to put quite a few hours into it, so keep that in mind, but for me, it's an easy, quick recommendation. Next, Frostpunk. The first, by the way, at 80% off. This game is about $6, meaning it's one of the cheapest entries on my list. This is a city builder, survival game, and survival is really the operative word. You cannot let this city fall, this Frostpunk city, dealing with some pretty difficult resource challenges, right? Obviously, the world isn't exactly plentiful, not full of food, and rather dangerous. The political intrigue in Frostpunk is another element that I think sets it apart from the rest. And most notably, as I've mentioned before, but now this recommendation has more weight than ever, this is Frostpunk 2. The game is set to release actually not that long. We could probably measure it in months now. This year, 2024. Frostpunk 2 is incredibly hyped, and for good reason. The initial game, Frostpunk 1, was great. A great hardcore city builder. And if you've got $8 lying around, maybe you can reach down behind the couch and find it. I'd recommend that you jump into Frostpunk 1 now, check it out, have a play, and that way you'll be nice and ready for Frostpunk 2 when it comes out. This footage is of course from the latest gameplay trailer. You've probably seen it already, about a million people have, but nonetheless, I thought I'd share it here as well. Hexarchy is the next item on my list. 30% off brings it down to about $15 US, and unlike some of the other things we've mentioned so far, this is a neat wee indie game. It's a wonderful merger of a 4X historical strategy game with a DECK builder, a card game. What you draw, and crucially what you discard, has a really meaningful impact on this game. Throw away some technologies to maybe be able to play an extra card or two this turn. Maybe you're spawning in a unit, or building a building inside of your city. Either way, you have to make trade-offs, and sometimes you might just discard the wrong thing. And that's one of the beautiful parts of Hexarchy. Alongside, I believe, its other key selling feature, it's fairly quick. Unlike, say, Crusader Kings 3 that we've already covered, you can probably sit down and finish a game of Hexarchy in an hour. The game also comes with a few different modes that I think are quite fun, including daily and weekly challenges, where because the player count isn't massive, you can probably score a pretty decent position on that leaderboard with a little bit of practice. Hexarchy is a gorgeous little indie game. I've really enjoyed it every time I've covered it here on my channel. I think it's a no-brainer recommendation if you're interested in historical strategy and, like me, maybe you're a little bit impatient from time to time. I'm going to change the pacing now. 5 rapid-fire recommendations from me. The first one, as you can probably see, is Humankind. Humankind is 75% off in this sale, bringing it down to a nice tasty about $15 US. This is, in my opinion, one of the best-looking 4X historical strategy games, and it's received loads of good updates. Much like Civilization 6, obviously the king of 4X historical strategy. At 90% off, the base game is an easy grab. I would recommend you get the main DLC packs as well, things like Gathering Storm and Rise and Fall. You can add optional civs later, but those 2 core DLCs have a big impact on gameplay. Next, City Skylines the First. Not 2, which is 10% off in this sale, but rather the initial game. The initial game has likely everything you may have wanted in Cities Skylines the Second. It's a solid city builder, probably the best one on the market, and super cheap. Next up, Against the Storm, another game I've recommended many times. It's a city builder where you'll build not just one but many colonies as you stretch out across, each one maybe taking an hour or 2 as you try and keep up with the needs of your population, and as you move through different glades to discover the map, you'll find a lot of intrigue. And finally, this was tricky. I thought about Anno, I thought about loads of different games, Hearts of Iron, but I settled with Age of Empires II. Of course, loads of discounts within the broader franchise, but this puppy keeps getting new stuff, keeps getting DLC, and nostalgically, it's probably my favorite. Back to our core recommendations, this one will come as no surprise to regular viewers. Age of Wonders 4 is now 30% off, bringing it down to around $30 US. Of course, as always, I forgot to mention at the start, but regional pricing will vary fairly wildly. Speaking of wild, Age of Wonders consistently reaches out into the wilds, most recently with its latest DLC adding Goatkin and Lupine, but also a free update that has, much like most of the others, impressed me quite a lot. Was it perfect? No. Were there some issues around the edges? Yes. And like always, will Triumph Studios most likely fix it? And fairly efficiently? Yes, they will. For me, Age of Wonders 4 was one of the best strategy games of last year. At the time of recording, it's around 3/4 of the way through its first year, and that means it's about 3/4 of the way through its DLC releases. I'd recommend the base game generally, just because of course it's still quite a bit of money, even at 30% off, given how new this title is. And honestly, the free updates have added so much variety, you may not necessarily need the DLC. The AI has gotten better and better, you can now call them into war like this, and they actually do it. War coordination with your vassals and others is brilliant, and that's probably just one small example of the broader world that this builds. And because I haven't mentioned it already, in case you're curious and you haven't seen it before, this is a 4X turn-based strategy game, obviously set in a wonderfully fantastical fantasy world. The customization is perhaps something that sets it apart, obviously getting better and better with each update. Overall though, I just think it's a really solid strategy game with some RPG elements thrown in for good measure. Thronefall is coming at you right now, 20% off, brings it down to about $8 US. And to be honest with you, this is maybe the one that you haven't heard of out of all of the games on this list. And my goodness, does it deserve its overwhelmingly positive reviews. It's essentially a minimalist tower defense game. Of course, a strategy game at its core. And as you play through, day and night, they represent sort of one cycle, if you will. You'll build up a small kingdom, a small city. Maybe you'll get economic buildings, maybe military ones to allow you to bring in extra units with you as you fight your way through the night. The night is dangerous, the day is for building. Obviously, it's a very simple game. The controls are fairly straightforward, but mastering it and actually being able to survive, well, as long as you can, actually proves really challenging. It's a beautiful little picturesque world, and I feel like it's a little bit of a hidden gem. Maybe it gets slightly overlooked. Too minimalist, not enough variety, I want more complexity from my strategy games, and that could be fair enough. But I think it's such a fun little game to play. You can honestly eat the hours away if you want to, or jump in and play it fairly quickly. Like Hexarchy, for example, a game might only take you an hour or two as you move through the progressively slightly more difficult world and levels as you go. An easy pick for me, largely thanks to its cheap price and beautiful replayability. Speaking of replayability, let's talk Old World. Hey you, at 30% off, it's down to about $30. Again, one of the more expensive items on this list, but I think it's well worth its price. Honestly, it is. Old World is, and has always been described, as a blend between Civilization 6 and Crusader Kings 3. Why? Well, it's a 4X historical strategy game, as you can see. Kind of familiar looking with Civ, but there's this other level of depth to it, where you build a dynasty, where characters really matter, each one bringing their own flair, potentially their own political agenda as well. It's that depth and detail that sets Old World apart from other 4X historical strategy games, Civilization, Humankind, and of course the upcoming millennia. With Mohawk Games bringing their Civ experience, Civ 4 in particular, and published by Hooded Horse, it's got a great team behind it, continues to receive new content. I think it's a great game. I also think that Galactic Civilizations 4 is a great game. Of course, this is a sci-fi 4X game. Stellaris could have been the obvious recommendation here, and indeed, I've recommended it many times before. It's arguably, and most of the time, my favorite 4X sci-fi game. However, Galactic Civilizations 4 is something pretty special. Recent updates to the game have leaned fairly heavily into AI. The game's AI storytelling, faction generation, and so much more. Now I believe you can basically just type in a little prompt, a sentence or two, and it will generate everything. A picture, a lore behind it, and everything else you might expect. Galactic Civilizations 4 is a fairly deep strategy game as well, not too dissimilar from other, say, 4X space games. But what it delivers differently is such a nice feel. And it's not just because of this generation, where you can really, sort of lean into what you like and the kind of frog dudes that you want to build. But the broader game is super fun as well. Executive orders let you snap in really fast to make change. All of the different peoples and civilizations have their own traits and characters. Manufacturing, research, income, food, and influence will largely drive your growth, alongside, of course, things like happiness and production. It's a really fun strategy game. And finally, Slay the Spire. 66% off, it's about $9, another very cheap entry. This time though, and unlike Thronefall, a rather classic one. This game's been around for quite a long time, and to be honest with you, I haven't played it much on Steam. I've put many hours into it on my iPad. Thankfully I don't have huge sausage fingers, otherwise it wouldn't be possible because the controls aren't necessarily optimized for it. But on Steam, 66% off, less than $10. It's a roguelike DECK building card game. The daily challenges are super fun, just like in Hexarchy, actually maybe more fun to be honest. And as you move through three levels, if you will, 3 different branches, as you make your way up to the Spire, you'll face incredibly difficult enemies, increasingly difficult enemies, and also the opportunity to trade for things like rewards and risks, the merchant maybe to pick up new cards for your DECK. It's a brilliant game. Thank you so much for joining me in this Steam Spring Sale for 2024 recommendations. As always, there'll be plenty of things that I've missed. Drop them down below in the comments and we'll hive mind some extra recommendations together. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.